popular church, basic movements, he is instinctively opposed to it.
I get the impression that you don't dislike this man, that perhaps, if anything, you feel sorry for him.
Yes, I feel sorry for him, yes.
And why is that?
Well, I see his difficulties. He is not a man of risks and doubts. He is, as he also told me, I have to keep the tradition. He is a man of the tradition.
After 68, Ratzinger became more pessimistic about the merits of opening up the church to the modern world. The Tübingen trauma led him to look for reassurance in some old certainties. Truth was best safeguarded in a decidedly top-down model of church in which authority was key. It's an authority he would himself wield increasingly, from Archbishop of Munich in the 1970s to his move to Rome in 1982, becoming the Vatican's doctrinal enforcer. His job was to determine what was essentially Catholic. This is the period when his opponents dubbed him God's Rottweiler. There were casualties. Among them, liberation theologian Leonardo Boff, accused of being a Marxist for his book on the church and the poor. Father Charles Curran, removed from his teaching post at the Catholic University of America because of his views on contraception and sexual ethics. Sister Janine Gramick, whose Notre Dame order was instructed to terminate her ministries to lesbian and gay Catholics. And Sister Lavinia Byrne, whose book advocating the ordination of women fell foul of the Vatican Curia. This is the period that will give us the clearest hint of what his mission as Pope Benedict would be.
If God exists, there must be such a thing as objective truth. Truth isn't purely something of man's own making. And Jesus Christ is the living, walking embodiment of that truth. And from Pope Benedict's point of view, the historical role of the Church is to act to guard the deposit of that truth. And this is a church which has survived the crumbling of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, Nazism, communism, and now the Pope has one more target in his sights. That is secular human relativism, the notion there's no such thing as objective truth. Truth is purely something which is called human opinion.
If there's one address that sums up his contemporary battleground and that unambiguously reveals his mission, it's a sermon given to fellow cardinals the day before they had to vote for a new pope.
Si va costituendo una dittatura del relativismo che non riconosce nulla come definitivo e che lascia come ultima misura solo il proprio io e le sue voglie.
In Ratzinger's eyes, if truth is a matter of mere human preference, we're on the road to ruin. Humans are only truly free when they act in accordance with God's plans for them, a head-on challenge to an over-sexualized Western world hell-bent on gratification and consumerism. And that is why the Pope is coming to Britain, because this land is one of the key battlegrounds in the struggle between faith and secularism. Rome is wary of what it sees as the over-liberal nature of much of British Catholicism. It wants to inject more backbone. And responding to that call, a collection of British Catholic foot soldiers who've been preparing the way for the papal visit and who are not afraid to get right into the thick of it.
What's Catholic Voices about?
It's about creating a bureau of speakers who are ready to go into a TV or radio studio at a moment's notice when the Pope's here to discuss almost anything.
So are you the Catholic Malcolm Tucker?
You could put it that way. The Catholic Church is Alistair Campbell. OK, let's... a few of you, I think 4 of you, have been involved in interviews since we last gathered. Neil, you did your...
I did warm up to it and I did enjoy it, but it was just me in the interview, so I was quite
It's quite intense.
It was quite intense, but it was very easy for me to dominate the facts, if that makes sense.
And in among the volunteers, two young feminists who are, pretty broadly speaking, on message.
We don't have a lot of guidance these days about, how to live. It's sort of anything goes. And there is one man who is there and he's prepared to tell you sometimes what you don't want to hear, but he'll tell you the truth. And that's a really, personally for me, I think that's a really positive thing, especially for my generation.
Bonnie, you're recently married and
Yes.
you took your honeymoon in Rome. Are you, in your married life, prepared to follow the Church's teaching absolutely to the letter of the law? And many people would think that might mean the risk of quite a large family.
My husband and I are practicing natural fertility management, and it's very simple. It takes barely any time at all.
How does it work?
And, well, you observe your tissue when you go to the loo, basically, very quickly, and then you write your assessment down on the chart at the end of the day. And it's something that couples are encouraged to do together, so there's no sort of awkward moment at the end of the evening where the husband kind of looks coyly at the wife and says, are we on tonight or not?
OK, let's put your Catholic Voices credentials to the test here. 2 or 3 absolute classic things which are bound to get thrown at you. The Pope's caused the death of thousands and thousands of people in Africa because you can't use condoms and AIDS spreads when people don't wear condoms.
The Church is on the ground in Africa. All AIDS provision practically is provided by the Church. In major cities, we provide about 40%. Certainly, the further away you get from the cities, it's up to 100%. The Church knows AIDS.
OK, one thing you might get, Madeleine, will be, there are so many poor people in the world, and look at all those treasures in the Vatican and all these jewellery and gold they all have. Why don't they just sell it all and implement the gospel on the ground?
Oh, please, that's the worst question.
But tonight, and not for the first nor the last time, a familiar subject forced its way back onto the agenda.
Jack was in the studio on the big question with people who'd been abused by priests. What do you say? It's very difficult. I think you have to initially be compassionate. Because the danger is if you're not compassionate, you're made the scapegoat for whatever the issue is.
Yes.
So suddenly you're not a spokesman.
You've both been chosen to get out the good news about the Catholic Church. This sex abuse crisis must have come at the most terrible time because you've got all these messages you're trying to get out, and then all you're getting is these torpedoes flying at you all over the place. That must be really difficult.
Well, in one way, it's a blessing because it does give us the opportunity to point out some of the facts about this issue. It's terrible. It's a terrible scandal. But a lot of these scandals are old scandals, and generally the public isn't interested in hearing about how the Church has reformed itself over the last 3 to 10 years.
Harnessing the spiritual zeal of a few dozen true believers is one thing, but can this ageing Pope really stir up the fire of faith in the very continent he feels has lost its way? I've come to Portugal, and I'm just one of thousands of pilgrims making for one of the holiest sites in Christendom. Once a rural outpost, Fatima is now an overrun tourist hotspot, no more so than on this very special day, the anniversary of manifold apparitions by the Virgin Mary to 3 shepherd children here in 1917. The dramatic intervention of the Virgin Mary here took place in a Europe torn by the First World War and the rise of communism. Pope Benedict believes the Fatima message is more relevant now than ever. When Ratzinger became Pope, he took the name of the patron saint of Europe. There were 5 papal trips in 2010, and every one of them is to a European destination. The Pope worries that secularization is leading to what he calls an eclipse in the sense of God. Europe must learn from its past.
Uma família humana pronta a sacrificar os seus laços mais sagrados no altar de mesquinos egoísmos de nação, raça, ideologia, grupo, indivíduo, Veio trazer a nossa bendita Mãe, oferecendo-se para transplantar no coração de quantos lhe entregam o amor de Deus que arde no seio.
Many had said that John Paul II would be an impossible act to follow, and that this diminutive, shy man would be an anticlimax. Yet the numbers tell a different story. 500,000 people listening in hushed silence to the sermon of an 83-year-old man, easily surpassing the turnout of the Polish Pope 10 years ago.
I think what this visit to Fatima has shown me is the unpredictability of trying to assess this man. Just when you think you've come to a conclusion about him, like when we were in Germany, people thought he was isolated and perhaps a bit remote from people. And yet when you see him in the Pope Mobile and you see him up front there, he does seem at ease with the crowd. There is not a forced smile, a quite natural smile around, which is very, for those of us who started on this journey with the Pope with a lot of doubts and difficulties, it's a very engaging and disarming appearance. He is so difficult, really, to put in a box.
Seeing him adored by the masses had a kind of mesmerising effect. But as I left Fatima, a familiar heavy-heartedness began to take a grip. You see, for me, there's one almighty stumbling block to overcome in my tortured relationship with Pope Benedict. There's an issue so vexed, it's led to thousands of souls giving up on the Church altogether, leaving other Catholics with a very tricky balancing act. People like ex-Opus Dei member and celebrated pianist Stephen Hough.
You're an openly gay Catholic. How do you reconcile being homosexual and belonging to a church which seems to condemn homosexuality? It must be an uncomfortable tension at times.
I think in many senses it's a waiting period. You know, before the 1960s, the Catholic Church was almost the safest place in the world for a gay man or woman to be, because you could become a priest, a nun, a monk, and no one was going to say, why aren't you getting married, why aren't you having children, where's your girlfriend? And that was really fine when everyone had the closet doors closed. But once those doors opened in the late 60s, and particularly I think in the last 10 years, when there's a sense of a real coming into the mainstream of homosexuality. You know, my mother's neighbour could be gay, and it's just not a problem because she likes them and they're committed to each other. And it ceased to be the issue that it was 50 years ago. So I think in a way the Church is in not a difficult position, but a position of waiting and testing.
But for the Pope, homosexual acts have no place in the divinely constructed plan. And remember, this is a theologian who cherishes order, truth, aesthetics. He's a classical man. He does not easily embrace the contemporary. This Schubert, a rare foray into relative modernity, away from his beloved Bach and Mozart, whose works open up a glimpse of the Ratzinger worldview.
It shows that he likes order, music where the emotions don't overcome the intellect, where there's a certain precision, a certain perfection, really. In fact, I think if you were to choose two composers who embody perfection, it would probably be Bach and Mozart. And maybe that's what he's striving for in his personal life and also in his thinking, in his theological thinking, to find something that's clear, that's beautiful, that embodies the whole human experience.
There's a lot I share with Stephen Hough. My piano playing, alas, stopped at grade 4. But of course, I'm gay as well. Over time, he feels the Church may change on all of this. But given the Pope's fierce language, can he be serious?